Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
So the fact of the matter is this: farming 7 days a week for a year on a 1,000-acre farm has generated an income of £144.
Correct. Fortunately, at the moment, we have this subsidy. When that goes...
What's a farmer's going to do?
Jeremy Clarkson asks a very pertinent question. That's from his Amazon Prime series, Clarkson's Farm. Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm James Woolcock. Well, look, Clarkson is asking a question that is a top concern for the nearly 300,000 agricultural workers who are anxious about their futures in the UK. And why do we care about them? Well, not only do they vote, they are on the front line of changes we are all going to be facing soon. Climate change, food security, and an increasingly uncertain world. And look, just across the channel, farmers literally blockaded the EU Commission this year until green rules were loosened. So this is going to be yet another key challenge for the government to tackle.
This is farmers in the UK are preparing to bring in their harvest, potentially some of the last aided by current subsidies. Now, before Brexit, the EU provided farmers with an annual basic farm payment of £100 per acre. Those EU payments are now being phased out. Farmers are receiving lower payments annually until 2027. That payment being replaced, though, by a sustainable farming incentive, which offers around £120 per acre and seeks to encourage the planting of environmentally friendly crops. So, in a way, there is more money on offer to farmers than before, but it's not that simple.
Well, I mean, look, it's very Bloomberg of you to bring out all the money because, look, a lot of farmers' industry groups are saying that, look, this may be more money, but it comes with real environmental targets attached that weren't there before, and at a time where farmers are already struggling with increased costs from everything from fuel to fertiliser, given we are in a heightened issues where production constraints driven by a conflict between Russia and Ukraine and in the Middle East is driving up prices for most people involved in agriculture.
And crucially, it drives down production of food. Now, the Labour manifesto says that food security is national security. They've set a target for half of all food purchased across the public sector to be locally produced or certified to higher environmental standards. Is that feasible? Is it enough? The country's self-sufficiency in fresh vegetables, for example, at its lowest since records began. So what can and what should the government do? Joining us now to discuss, David Exwood, Deputy President of the National Farmers Union. David, thanks for joining us. How would you describe the state of British farming today? We've laid out a couple of the facts there.
UK farming is in a period of transition and huge uncertainty. Everything you described there, and didn't even mention the weather, and probably one of the biggest variables on all that is, climate change. Just the weather. We've just had the wettest winter for 150 years. All these things have an impact. So what we're seeing is that at a period of change in government policy, huge variation in costs and input, huge variation in experience in the weather, which we have right now. Right now, there is warm weather. It's dry in the south of England. The north of England experience probably its coldest, wettest summer ever. So we've got this huge variability, period of transition in policy, and that's leading to uncertainty. The farmers are carrying all the risk in the supply chain, and what's happening is they're just producing less food. And then you set that against the government ambition that food security is national security. Well, what does that mean?
And David, help me understand though here. We hear from the government the budget is tight. They are potentially having to up taxes, which they understand will be very unpopular. They have all sorts of spending demands. Can you make the case for the farming sector in a time where almost every other sector is also going to be making the case for subsidies? Why is farming so important?
So the two challenges facing the country at the moment is to grow food to feed our nation, not all our food, but a significant proportion, tackle the challenges of climate change, and support, encourage, recover the environment. Farming is the only industry that can do all those things. We manage 70% of the land in the UK. We are the people who can grow the nation's food, look after the environment, deal with some of the impacts of climate change. And actually, we have the existing amount of money. We understand the challenge on the public purse, but a farmer will make best use of that money and deliver both those things better than anyone else. That is the opportunity of farming. That is the challenge we have. I know we can do it. It needs to be a joined up policy between the government and the industry. and how we can best target that money to do that both. But it is possible, and we can deliver for growth as well. Look, we can grow the amount of food we produce, the energy we produce. There's so many things we can gain from the countryside. We can also sit alongside and satisfy the government's growth agenda.
How much money is needed, though, to be able to sustain an industry that can do all of that? How much has to come from government for that?
Well, DEFRA as a department has one of the most challenging targets out there, and it has this combined ambition of food security and the legislated environmental targets that that are there that we have to meet. We estimate to do both those things, we need add an extra £1 billion to the existing sort of legacy budget of 2.4 billion we had. So we think there needs to be a bigger budget. And we think, given the scale and the importance of those challenges, that is actually a very modest amount of money that will deliver a huge amount.
Well, look, so if it's coming from the government, or whether it's coming from, say, higher prices in supermarkets, it's still going to be the public who are paying for it. And as we've seen in the past couple of years, people get angry when prices or taxes go up. The UK is always going to be outcompeted by cheaper food producers in the global market. So how do you give farmers a living wage while ensuring low prices for the public?
So there's a real assumption there. There's always going to be cheap food available from somewhere else in the world. And what we're seeing is that the challenges facing British farmers are the challenges of farmers right across the world. And we cannot rely on that. And you saw empty supermarket shelves in the last sort of year, 18 months. That was because there wasn't any food anywhere else either. So we cannot make this assumption that we can just get food somewhere else. So we actually do need to look at how we support UK farmers, British farmers, to carry on doing what they do, because we can't rely on the rest of the world to feed us, and we shouldn't rely on them. So, but it isn't about spending more. We have historically had some of the cheapest food in the world in this country, some of the most affordable food in the world in this country. So actually, let's recognise that what we need to do as a country, it isn't about paying vastly more, but it's about the biggest problem is the share of the risk in the supply chain. Now, as I said at the beginning, farmers are carrying all the risk of food production, and that actually isn't all about government policy and money. It is about how the supply chain works and how it shares risk. And actually, there's a huge amount that can be done there too.
How much more do consumers need to be prepared to pay for good British grown food, and how do you convince them that it's worth it?
It isn't necessarily about paying more. It's about the share of the risk. The issue is farmers are experiencing huge volatility across every sector, and we're seeing declining output in every sector. And actually the share of the risk, it's not that farmers need to make lots of money. They just need to know they're going to make some money. They've got an even chance of making some money. And because the risk reward balance is so out of kilter at the moment, many are walking away from the industry, and we need to address that that balance, and we need and that risk reward. That is actually what we need to do, rather than talk about higher prices in the shops.
We talked a bit about sort of anger, sort of anger of consumers earlier in the sort of chat, David. I want to ask you about anger of farmers and sort of the morale in the sector itself, because again, you look all around the world and we are seeing protests. I mean, it's been quite successful in some parts of Europe. Would the NFU ever consider protesting Parliament?
I think you need to recognise that, yes, the protests that happened in Europe were very much in reaction to what's going on in the common agricultural policy and issues in Europe. They're not quite the same here. But farmers are under huge amount of pressure. There's this drip of stories about how either they're doing it wrong, or they need to do more, or they need to change what they do. They're feeling the pressure at the moment. And as I say, at the moment, and the net result is we're seeing sort of mental health levels, stress levels in the industry at all-time highs. We saw a survey earlier that showed that confidence is at an all-time low. And so, yeah, farmers will they protest? They may. But we can't just put farmers under endless pressure, expect them to deliver all the things that we ask of them, regardless of the circumstance. We've got to, at some point, stop and look at what farmers need and say, how are we going to address that? We have the legislated environmental targets. Well, how about some legislated targets on food, or some real recognition? How do we turn food security is national security into policy. What does that mean?
In your engagements with the new government, how optimistic are you that they're listening? Do they understand these challenges? Do they have the right policy tools in mind?
Steve Reed and Daniel Zeichner are two people who have spent their time before they were elected really getting to know the industry and understand the issues. And I have real confidence that they have and will do the work to understand the issues. Of course, at some point, that's got to translate into policy actions and decisions. And we await those with eagerness.
How long are you going to give them?
Well, look, it's still early days, and we have to recognise that. They've only been in power, 2 months, if that. So it is early days. Parliament is back next week. We will be looking for early decisions that will recognise the challenges that face the country's farmers and give them confidence to keep doing what they do.
What is the key policy step if you're asking them to make one priority in this? What is the first thing that you want to see from the government that's going to help the sector?
I think the budget is the key. The DEFRA budget, the budget that will ultimately underpin their policy. We have been operating off, so the budget was guaranteed for the life of the last Parliament. We want to see similar certainty about the budget for this Parliament. So actually an early decision on what that looks like will be the best thing they can do to give confidence to farmers. And that's what we're looking for. There is things that the government needs to do, but it is a time of huge opportunity. Equally, the changes in technology and a move to more sustainable farming are really exciting. On my farm here in Sussex and right across the country, there are good things happening.
OK, so it's not all doom and gloom. Well, Deputy President of the National Farmers Union, David Exwood, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Sophie Arundel and our audio engineer was Sean Grastamakia. I'm James Woolcock.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.